What's up, y'all? Welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new, my name is Sydney, aka Shawty That Reads, and in today's video, I'm going to be reviewing Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy Degruy. So this is the first book in a series that I'm currently doing on Black trauma, the legacy of loss that African Americans seem to face today, and most importantly, y'all, how to heal from that. So make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. That way you don't miss out on the next review in the series. Let's get into it. I'd like to start by saying that the point of this video is not to highlight the trauma of Black people in order to, gain a profit, get some likes. I don't know what y'all be doing, but that is not the point of this video. This is also not political. I just want you guys to know that the main point of the video and this book is to highlight history that has been erased, highlight history that has been denied to all of us. I feel like it's extremely important for the Black community specifically to learn our history so we can heal from it, because there is a lot of trauma that we have inherited from the things that we went through. However, I do want to stress that this video is also for everybody to learn, because like I said, this history was denied to all of us. I don't think anybody learned what we're about to discuss here in their American history classes, including Black people. So please don't feel ashamed if you don't know your history, because it's really hard to find, but now that we're grown and we can go out and buy these books, we don't really have an excuse, you guys. So I just hope that everyone goes into this with an open heart and an open mind, because it's about to get really, really real. So before I get into this very brutal and dark side of history, I want to define post-traumatic slave syndrome for you guys, because we can't really get any further without that, right? So post-traumatic slave syndrome, defined, is a condition that exists when a population has experienced multi-generational trauma resulting from centuries of slavery and continues to experience oppression and institutionalized racism today. Added to this condition is a belief, real or imagined, that's important, that the benefits of the society in which they live in are not accessible to them. This then is post-traumatic slave syndrome. So first thing I want to dive into is the centuries of slavery that African Americans experienced. I think that when people think of slavery, because this is where we're getting into the parts that we haven't learned about. This is where we're getting into the real brutality of it, so please brace yourselves. That type of slavery was so brutal because in other forms of slavery, or indentured servantry, if that's even a word, you had a way out. You could work your way out, you could buy your way out, or even if you didn't, your family wasn't going to be affected by it after you. They still had a chance to create something for themselves. However, African Americans, once you were a slave, you were a slave, and that was it. You had no power. You were akin to an animal, sometimes even less than. So you were just property, and that was it. And there was no way you were going to work your way to freedom. Okay, so that's brutal enough already. Any form of slavery is obviously abhorrent and terrible. However, that is one of the huge differences between chattel slavery in the Americas and slavery in Africa, or when people talk about Romans having slaves, it's a tad bit different. Also, the fear instilled in the slaves to make sure that they remained docile and to make sure that they never planned an uprising is insane. The lengths that these people went to is just astounding. So what does this look like? It looks like the biggest male slave being raped in front of everyone to show dominance and to show how powerless the slaves were against their masters. This looks like using African American women as breeders for more slaves to sell, rape, torture, molest, or honestly whatever they wanted to do to them. This looks like defecating into a slave's mouth and gagging them for hours. This looks like having other slaves whip or torture their own peers to, instill a sense of distrust among the slaves. This looks like using slave women that could no longer procreate as experiments. That's where gynecology comes from today, guys. The next time you go get a pap smear, think about how an African American woman was laid on a table and was experimented on with absolutely no numbing, no medication, nothing. Okay? That is what that looked like, and none of this is going to be put into an American history book. You know what? Let me not think that way. I mean, I meant to say none of this has been in any American history book. That's why books like these are so important, because we need to know these things to understand how all of those things combined have contributed to the trauma and the post-traumatic stress, truly, that African Americans are experiencing today. So the next thing she said was how it continues to oppress us and how we continue to experience institutionalized racism today. So even after slavery was abolished in 1865, there not much changed, really. Instead of being a slave, they had convict leasing. So they would just basically arrest any free slave that they deemed unfit, and they'd be like, we're arresting you for breathing. And then you become a convict and you work for probably the same guy that owned you before, whoever wants you, until you're dead, or until you pay off whatever debt, whatever monetary value that they came up with in their mind. So it sounds very similar to the prison system we have today, right? Mainly people of color, mostly African American men who are pulled over and stopped because they are more likely to be pulled over and stopped. They're taken to prison and they are now building freeways or making sweatshirts, toys, shoes, getting paid 95 cents an hour, basically free labor, right? It's a little too similar. So that's just one way, that's just one little way, one huge way that we are still being affected by something that was going on back in the 1800s, 1900s. And I will bring something personal into this because I think it's very important to learn about these things, to then have conversations with people. So earlier, right before filming this video, I was talking to my dad about it, and I wanted to tell him how the Runaway Slave Patrol, that their symbol, the star that they have, is the exact same thing that the LAPD still uses, the sheriff still uses, the exact same thing, and how, I don't know, y'all, but that just don't seem right to me, right? If that's not problematic, then I don't know. So I hesitated to tell him, and I decided to tell him, and he was open to listening. He said, what? Oh my God. My daddy's white, by the way, okay? So this is a difficult conversation to have, regardless. His father is also a police officer. He said, you know what? You're right. When Grandpa became a commander, they gave him that star. I'm looking at it right now, and I was like, yeah. And the conversation ended there. However, I think the fact, I mean, I know y'all don't know my dad, but the fact that we had that conversation and he could sit back without being defensive and be like, oh my God, that is wrong. That doesn't make sense. Things are kind of adding up here. That is a huge deal. And it's a huge deal because that's one person's perspective changing based on history, a fact that has been left out, which is why I'm saying it's up to us to read these things and know these things, so that now I've shared that information with him, he can share it with the next person, the next person, the next person, and that is just one way of how we heal collectively. Sorry if I went on a tangent, but we were getting to the healing part anyway, so apologies. But yes, please have these difficult conversations with your family members. And of course, depending on your family, every conversation is going to look different. So I'm biracial. Most of my conversations revolve around getting the white side of my family to understand the Black experience. And then on the Black side of my family, conversations are going to look a little bit different. It's going back to the definition of post-traumatic slave syndrome. We have that it's a condition, a belief, real or imagined, that the benefits of the society in which they live in are not accessible to them. So I think that's important to understand here, real or imagined, that these things have affected us. So she gives an example of how most Black children, if you ask, and I've had these conversations with my friends as well, most of us will say that our teachers didn't like us or that we were demonized by our teachers. Whether that is real or imagined, what's important is, why are all these Black children saying that? Why do we feel this way? And there's so many examples in this book, but I want to hone in on the media. The way that we're perceived in the media is huge, which she calls racist socialization. So Black kids, little kids, we go out into the world, or adults, We go out into the world and we see an image of us that has been created by somebody else, an image that has been haunting us since the 1600s. So we go out and we see that, and some of us either prescribe to the white standard of beauty, or we act a way that we think is going to be appropriate through the lens of a white person, or we do the opposite and we fulfill a stereotype, and we have this mindset of, well, if you're going to have these views of me, then I'm going to make sure you have these views of me. You know what I'm saying? So she poses the idea of racialist socialization in order to heal from these images that we see that are not correct, that are in no way, a real picture of what an African American really looks like, because we get to define that. TV don't get to define that. We get to define that. So in order to heal from that, she really urges parents to have conversations with their children before they go out and see these images. And, again, making it personal for myself, my mom is definitely the Black mom that thinks that you shouldn't put those ideas in your kid's head already. And of course, it's totally up to you how you want to raise your kids. I don't have kids. I'm just telling you what she said in the book. I found it very interesting though. So she says, instead of having your child go out and see these images that will make them feel inferior, have conversations with them and say, unfortunately, this is the reality of what it is right now. And these are things that you may experience when you step outside of this household. But, in this home and in reality, you can be, do, have whatever you want. Because Black people, we can be anything. Race is a social construct. White people tried to tell us what we could or could not do. They tried to tell us we're inferior, less than, not as smart, whatever, okay? Make sure your kids know that none of that is true. That's what she's saying. And remind yourself too, as adults, we have to remind ourselves sometimes, we have to remind ourselves that we are so much more than our trauma. And we are so much more than the stereotypes that are perpetuated still in the media. Very, very important. Dr. Joy also dives into the idea of vacant esteem that can be seen in the African American community. So just think of all of the things that I mentioned previously, all the brutal, awful things that happened to African Americans, 300, 400 years ago. And how long it happened to them for those 300 to 400 years. And think about how that can affect the generations after them. So after hundreds of years of being told that you were inferior, of being segregated from the community because you were dirty and dumb and animal-like. And then, we come to now where Black Lives Matter movements keep popping up year after year after year, when it's like this has been going on since forever, you guys, okay? This ain't nothing new. This is nothing new. It's just not taught, okay? So think about all that and the vacant self-esteem that can be felt through that. She says, in order to heal from that, I'm a huge proponent of self-care. However, in this instance, we have to go beyond self-care. We have to go into the difficult conversations that I was talking about. So within the African American community, shame is a really huge thing. I think in any culture, no one wants to air out their dirty laundry ever, but specifically within the African American culture, you don't ever want people to see a crack in the facade, because you just can't be seen as weak when you have to try 10 times harder than everyone else to make it. Okay, this is the idea that we have in our heads. And instead of doing that, let's sit down and have these conversations that we may not want to have with our parents, or our grandparents, because I for sure come from a family where they do not want to talk about, what they experienced. And I want to say I understand that, but I don't understand because I didn't live it. But she does give a few tips on how to approach those conversations, but I think it's really important to talk about, mental health in the Black community, sexual abuse in the Black community. I was just talking about this with a friend, but how many Black women have experienced sexual abuse within the family, or how many of your family members have, and no one wants to talk about it. It's a really hard thing to talk about, but I just like that, she's pushing for these open, honest conversations conversations, she tells her own story about how her brother sat everyone down and said, we're all going to sit here and share any secrets, any resentments that are within this family. And she said it was very powerful and very healing. So, you know, I shared my story. I'm working on it myself. So I really urge you guys to do that if you can, you know, tread lightly with respect. These are really heavy conversations. So, but yes, I would suggest doing that for sure. I've already tried it and I'm liking the results. I want to end with healing. And I want to end with a part of the book that really stuck out to me. And it was a section titled Knowing Ourselves. And I think that's going to be the most important part of the healing process for the Black community to heal, to really heal as a collective, is to know that, you know, despite the trauma and despite this history, we still have really came out on top in the grand scheme of things. They took our culture from us, our language, our identity, okay? And we created a new culture with new foods and a new way of speaking and a new way of doing things. And we've taken African culture and kind of spinned it with our own and African American culture. You know what I mean? So I think that's something definitely to be proud of. After hundreds of years of oppression and hundreds of years of people telling us that we can't do it, throwing us scraps, what do? We create with it, and everybody wants to be us, okay? That's just what it is. So I just really love that. Know your worth, know who you are, take the time to learn this history, because this alone is a huge, huge step towards healing. Because how can you really heal if you don't understand yourself? And how can you really heal if you don't understand, like, why you have the issues that you do? You know what I'm saying? So I really urge you guys to pick up this book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. It really, really helped me find some solace through everything that's been going on this summer. I feel like it's still going back to the discrepancies in healthcare. I feel like it's really hard to find therapy as a Black woman, because, you know, I obviously would really like to talk to someone who looks like myself. We can talk about that further in the third book review, because we are going to be talking about Black mental health specifically. However, this book in its own way really helped me find some solace and some peace, because I felt like I got to connect with my history. It was nice to not be denied my reality while reading this. So if you're like me and you're kind of feeling down and looking for some hope during these crazy, crazy times, I would highly suggest reading this, because it really helped me. So for the next video, I'm going to be taking everything that we learned from post-traumatic slave syndrome, and I'm going to be applying it to Transcendent Kingdom by Yagyasi. And this fiction novel is basically looking at the legacy of loss within the African American community, where she's looking at a specific family. So I really want to take everything that we learned from this book, apply it to this, to show you guys that if you don't want to read something as traumatic as post-traumatic slave syndrome, you can read a fiction novel and you are still going to learn the same things, because that's how powerful books are, y'all. Okay? I urge you to breathe easy. Whoops! Sorry guys, forgot to mention that the related blog post to any video is always going to be in the description box, so make sure to check that out. And any book mentioned is always also going to be in the description box at my bookshop. Okay, bookshop.org/shop/Shawtyreads. It's always going to be there for you guys. Okay?